Hey guys, today I'm going to show you guys exactly how to get good grades using one of the methods that I used to get a 4.0 GPA in college. And before we get into that, I'm Sade, also known as the Scholarship Junkie, and I help students across the country succeed at college and pay for college using resources like my website, The Scholarship Collective. So make sure you visit thescholarshipcollective.com to check some of that stuff out. Now, let's get right into it. First, I want to talk about a technique that I use over and over again to help me learn better, learn faster, and more efficiently in a way where I understood the topics that we're building on each other. So first, I want to explain what that method is, the basics of it, because you're probably already familiar with it. The method that I'm going to explain in this video is called the chunking method. Simply put, the chunking method is essentially just putting information that comes in large quantities, chunking it down into smaller, more manageable pieces so that you can learn it better. You probably already passively chunk when you're doing your studying to date. So for example, an example of passive chunking would be you're reading 17 chapters and you decide that you're going to chop up that activity into one chapter at a time. And then from there, you're going to take that chapter and only read one paragraph at a time. And you may do that over the course of 7 or 6 or 10 days, right? So that is passively chunking. You're highlighting as you go what you think might be important. That's passive chunking. That's sitting there saying, I'm going to break this up and I'm going to learn this separately. But while I'm actually doing the readings, while I'm actually looking at the information and reading it, am I active with that method or am I passive with that method? So another layer to chunking is whether you're active or passive. Most people are passive. Today I'm going to show you how to be active and the way that I do it. So active chunking is going to be where maybe you are highlighting, maybe you are making notes of the things you think are important throughout the chapters, but you're going to do it in two categories. You're going to have two categories. One for knowledge, foundational knowledge will be the first category. The second category is going to be exceptions. So you're going to have what's my foundational knowledge in each paragraph that I need to know, and then what is the exception to that base knowledge that already exists as you're taking notes. So how do you know if something's actually base knowledge or your basic foundational knowledge? Well, think about this. Does one concept transfer from the next paragraph over or the next chapter over? Do you need to understand what was in the first paragraph to understand what's in the second paragraph, and so on and so forth? That's a good way to determine, is the knowledge foundational? And if you're not sure, you can just jot it down as you go, highlight it as you go, whatever. But at the end, you're going to have a list of stuff that you think is foundational and stuff that you think is an exception to that foundational knowledge. And you may read it over and you may be in your exceptions column and you may be like, well, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm seeing a pattern here in the exceptions column. That might mean that you accidentally put the exceptions in the exception that is actually a foundational knowledge piece in the exception column. So no matter which way you do it, whether you get it correct or not about which one's base knowledge or foundational knowledge and which one's not, you're going to see the pattern at the end of the chapter of what you decided was base and exception, and you're going to be able to understand which category it goes into. So now that you have your base knowledge and your exception, I'm going to show you or give you a little bit of an example of how you can apply this to an actual concept. So for those of you who don't know, I was an accounting major, so I'm going to use an accounting example in this video. And the example I'm going to use is the normal balance of an account. So assets have a normal balance that is positive, and it's also a debit balance. So that is a foundational concept because it doesn't change. It's something you need to know to be able to categorize assets in the future if you're ever trying to do a journal entry, and it has an opposition to it, right? So there's something called a contra asset out there, which it does the opposite. For example, a asset could be something like an accounts receivable, and then a contra asset could be something like returns and allowances, because it does the opposite of what the foundational concept is. A contra asset, For example, instead of having a positive debit balance, it's going to have a negative debit balance. And it's the complete opposite of the original foundational concept we learned that an asset has a normal debit balance. So your contra asset is the exception. Which accounts are contra assets? Irrelevant for this example, but it's showing you that if you can understand, hey, this is my foundational knowledge, when you hear an exception, it'll stick because you know for sure what the base knowledge is. And this method, you can use it with any subject. If you break it down to its core, you can use it with any subject. That was a very black and white example. Of course, there's going to be things that are exceptions, and there's going to be exceptions to those exceptions. And obviously, in that case, you would still be able to use this method, but you would have to go further and say maybe there's not just two categories, knowledge base, foundation base, and exception. Maybe there's an additional category of chunking that you need to do if there's too many exceptions to count, right? So, but this method helped me so much when I was studying because it made me really ask the question, what is building on itself and what can I probably use as the exception? Do I need to remember a million exceptions, or do I just need to remember the base knowledge and then understand that those couple of things are going to differ from the base knowledge? So that is a great method that I used while I was studying in college, and it essentially helped me manage every single subject that I've ever taken. I take a lot of accounting classes, finance, all that stuff. I even took chemistry as like one of my electives, and it helped immensely in that class. So when you're thinking about your technique of how you're breaking down information, large pieces of information into smaller pieces of information, think about if you're actively chunking or if you're passively chunking. You really want to be active when you're doing this, because if not, it's going to be a cluster of notes that you have no idea how it relates to each other. And you may even be able to chunk by topic. So make sure when you're doing this, you're doing it in an active way. Don't just read, right? Read to understand, not to memorize, and you will learn as much as you're possibly able to. Hopefully that was helpful. If you guys enjoyed this video, or if you have any other questions about chunking or other techniques of learning, make sure you drop a comment down below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you subscribe.